Good morning, APUSHers. Topic of this video is to look at topic number 7.12a. This is on the home front mobilization during World War II. This video is going to focus more so on economic mobilization. Here we go. So when we talk about economic mobilization, we are talking about the transition of the U.S. economy from a peacetime economy, kind of working for the normal capitalistic needs of the people, and transitioning that over towards the wartime economy, where a real central purpose of the war, of the economy of American industry, is going to be to help contribute to the overall war effort. And this happens really kind of starting, a little bit in the late 1930s, 1939, going into 1940, as U.S. neutrality begins to wane a little bit as those neutrality laws kind of transition. But as you get into the course of the war itself, there's going to be some real significant economic impacts at home. We talked about one of these at the end of our discussion on the Great Depression and the New Deal, because it is this wartime economic mobilization that is going to lead to the end of the Great Depression. The increase of production leads to an increase of jobs. There's more government spending, and it's deficit spending. And so this kind of connects into things that we talked about in some earlier topics here in 7b. When we talk about this in terms of the economic benefit it's going to have for the war, the nickname that gets applied to this is the arsenal of democracy. That the military production that comes out of the United States economy happens not because of a command economy or a national socialist kind of economy, but because there's really a sense of patriotism and volunteerism and effort from all Americans. It does come with some government oversight, though. There is the creation of the Office for War Mobilization, the OWM. So this is, I kind of let the acronym in there, although I don't really see it in print very many places, because this is in part kind of an extension of the ideas that showed up during the Progressive Era and World War I, for that matter, with the War Industries Board, but also during the New Deal. All those little alphabet acronym agencies during the New Deal, this is just the World War II version of making sure there is economic oversight so production in American factories can be towards the war effort. And this arsenal of democracy is going to play a pivotal role in winning the war. This is a Ford Motor factory, and this may be a GM factory, General Motors, where they've converted things over from manufacturing cars to manufacturing tanks. And so you can see these partially constructed tanks in different levels of completion as you're looking from one row to the next to the next. This arsenal of democracy is going to equip and provide provisions for the Allied troops, both American troops and British and French, and to some extent even like Soviet troops and Chinese troops. And this is a Ford Motor plant that's been converted over to create B-25 bombers. It's not just the military equipping of them. It's kind of like just the normal day-to-day sort of thing, where there is the transition of the transportation of like foodstuffs and of clothing materials for uniforms and medical materials for field hospitals. And this is all really such a huge change of what goes on. I know in the Homefront video, it talked about this a little bit, and it spent a good amount of time talking about how this was an increased opportunity for women in the workforce, but it's also an increased opportunity for minority employment as well. It wasn't really referenced directly in the video, but you can kind of, in some of the images that they showed, there was an increase in African Americans in the workforce, and Mexican Americans and Latino Americans in the workforce. And this is a real big transition that I think is going to, it's one of those like double-edged ways of looking at it. This is providing economic opportunity for women and ethnic minorities, but there's also going to be the presence of obstacles that are there. The obstacles, we'll see that a little bit more on 712B when we're looking at the social impact. But in terms of economic opportunity, the opportunities are there because there's this real dedication towards the war effort. With this dedication to the war effort, American factories are transitioning goods over towards wartime use, for military use, for governmental use. That means in terms of like civilian uh, consumption, supplies are limited, but demand is high because with more people at work, there's money being made. People want to spend money, and so the in the early phase of the war, 1941 going to the first part of 1942, inflation is a problem because there are Americans that are on the home front earning lots of money that are in fact wanting to spend that money, and so that drives prices up. The poster here kind of talks about how, Americans need to do their part for the war effort to help control inflation. And when it says help your OPA, OPA is the Office of Price Administration. This is a government agency that is going to set prices for certain goods during the war. Again, this is similar to what you see with some New Deal programs. The NRA did this before it was declared unconstitutional. But here, this is kind of pitched in terms of like the governmental powers related to defense of the nation and winning the war. And so to do this, you control the prices that businesses can charge, but you also want to control the demand for those. And so there are government rationing programs that are put in place. If you wanted to buy gasoline, or if you wanted to buy, coffee or sugar or things that were just kind of like normal consumption during the war, you could not buy it without your OPA issued ration book. You spent money, but you also had stamps to make sure that you weren't going to be overbuying. You don't want to create shortages on the home front that's going to impact inflation, but you definitely don't want to create shortages that are going to impact the war effort overseas. And so this is really another element of American volunteerism to encourage Americans, even if you're not directly involved in fighting the war, to do your part for this war to help with the survival of freedom and democracy. In terms of paying for the war, this is like paying for World War One, or paying for the Civil War for that matter. That there is an increase of taxes that takes place, and there's a real emphasis in buying war bonds. Saw a little bit of film footage of this in the Homefront video, but with the posters here, you can kind of see some of the patriotic and pulling at the heartstrings and trying to make sure that Americans understand that you have to do your part when it comes down to, well, winning the war, even if it just means spend some of your hard-earned money in these new jobs that you're getting from economic mobilization, and just spend those on war bonds, and you can get that money back later on, like in the 1950s or in the early 60s, depending on how the term of years it's in the war bond. There's a great sense of volunteerism that goes on. So there's car sharing clubs, carpooling to help conserve gasoline, because gasoline was in high demand. If your car broke down, there were clubs that were set up to help organize like repurposing of auto parts. There were scrap metal drives designed to take care of some of the need for goods on the home front, but even more so for goods overseas. And so just a little bit of effort would go a long way. And one of the more visible examples of this was the use of victory gardens. Planting a fruit and vegetable garden in your backyard and having community organize, or doing this kind of thing at school, so you could grow some of your own food on a small scale. But if millions of people do this on a small scale, you can ship more food overseas to feed the troops and to feed the allies in these war-torn areas. And this is where it's not just the U.S. military that comes into play on this, but really a huge effort from Americans in almost all walks of life. Economic mobilization is kind of hard to kind of put your finger on, but I'm hoping through this we've seen 2 or 3 different areas where this is going on, so you've got a little bit of a tangible idea of how at home Americans, home front Americans, contributed towards that war effort.